All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol, and we're here with Caylen Wojcik of Modern Day Sniper. And there's going to be kind of a bunch of background and context that we lay out on the table here before we get into the kind of meat and potatoes of what this podcast is. But we are basically kicking off a bit of a series together that will probably take, Caylen will probably have some content about it. I'll have some content about it. Sure, there'll be a couple of podcasts on either side of the fence, and then some videos about it as well. But essentially, there's two reasons for this. I ran into a really frustrating situation hunting, and then also there's been a bunch of, I wouldn't even call it controversy, but there's been a bunch of conflicting information in the rifle hunting world that's probably an age-old debate, but has resurfaced recently around a smaller caliber fragmenting bullet versus a larger caliber, higher energy delivering bullet. And that was just the tip of the iceberg that made me realize I'm a very evidence-based individual when it comes to gear reviews, and I like to do my own research. But with guns, for some reason, I was outsourcing that. I was having people on that I trusted, but all those people kind of have different opinions, and I realized I didn't have my own set of opinions. I was just kind of letting other people parrot their opinions, and I didn't really know where I standed on some of these issues. And I finally came to the point where, okay, enough is enough. I need to upgrade both my skill with rifle hunting and my knowledge about rifle hunting and bullets and ballistics and all that stuff. So I reached out to Caylen. We were both kind of excited to hook up. And so this is the first of whatever this is going to look like. So first and foremost, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm excited to kind of get together and create some content for people, because I think there's a real need for it.
Absolutely, Jay. Thanks for having me on board. I've been following your stuff for a while and watching you kind of grow and develop into, where you're at with all of your content that you're producing. And I think we have some really similar views on many things. I love the title of your podcast, The Mindful Hunter. Our tagline is mindfulness behind the rifle. So that's something that's really important for us. There's so many things that we can unlock with regard to learning about ourselves from just the activities of hunting, obviously, and then the activities of shooting. And shooting is one of these things where at first shooting is a very physical act, meaning you're learning how to connect yourself to either a rifle, a pistol, or in your case, you're an archery hunter primarily. There's that physical aspect that happens at first, but once that stuff is addressed and dialed, the next thing is the mindset aspect of things, and the mindset and the mental focus and concentration is what is going to take your shooting to the next level. And so being able to stay present, being able to stay focused, and being able to stay in that really hyper focused, concentrative state is what is going to make or break your success. And so that's like next level though. And so the way that we got to teach, or the way that we have to take this, is it's a crawl, walk, run philosophy, in that, you have to have core bits of information firmly established and rooted before we can layer anything else on top of it. Because if you start layering all of those other things on top of it, our foundation is going to be built on a bed of sand, and it's just going to crumble and crack. So where you're like, what you want to do and what you explained to me is exactly in line with our progression in how I teach it. And I've been teaching this stuff full-time professionally for 15 years now. And I've been around it ever since I was 14 years old. And so pretty much this has become a lifestyle for me. And this is just pretty much what I do every single day of my life.
Yeah, I love it. When I got back out of the mountains and I kind of started reaching out to a few trusted friends, and I'd followed your stuff for quite some time as well. And Colton in particular kind of said, you got to get in touch with Caylen. Like, I knew immediately, like, there was a real alignment of principles there. So before we dig into where we're going to start this whole process, and I'd like to say, just to set expectations for people listening to the podcast, today's going to be about kind of setting expectations and setting a roadmap for what the next kind of series is going to look like and where I need to start, what questions I need to ask myself. But I would love to hear a little bit about both your background as a hunter, your background as a marksman, and then what led you to the pivot to say, like, okay, not only do I want to do this stuff, but I want to teach this stuff. Like, I have a voice or I have an ability to deliver some value that's really lacking right now. I'd really be interested to hear some of your background in regards to that.
Sure. Well, so I started hunting from, I think, just an innate desire to be in Mother Nature. Pardon me. I didn't grow up in a hunting family. I grew up in rural Western New York in a tiny little town that is really, really, it's full of game. It was full of game. It still is full of game. And it was very low barrier for entry in terms of actually like getting out and going to do the activity of hunting. I grew up right on the Niagara River as it dumps into Lake Ontario. So right there at the very point where there's a really historic, notable location called the Fort Niagara. And so all along that whole Western New York area, it really was the frontier of historical times. And it's nothing but country. It's nothing but rural, hardwoods, a lot of agriculture, soybeans, corn, apples. I mean, you name it, right? There's a lot of agriculture. So I don't really understand how it occurred, but around 11 years old, I just felt this need to be a hunter. And it was something that was kind of strange. My dad didn't hunt. My mom certainly didn't hunt. And I didn't really have anybody in my family to guide me along the way, because my uncles were off doing their thing, and neither my grandparents or my grandfathers hunted. So I got a BB gun, and much to my mother's dismay, I started to go kill stuff off the back porch of our little apartment in Western New York, in our tiny little town. And so it was kind of like, I got to do something with this little feral child here of mine. And my mom got me in touch with a local guy. And at the time, he was probably in his mid-20s. His name's Bill Joseph. And Bill essentially, she went to him and said, "Hey, will you do something with this kid? Like, can you please help me and at least, point him in the right direction?" And that guy ended up being my mentor, right? That guy ended up being my childhood mentor as a young man, and really helped me in a lot of ways by instilling sound morals and sound ethics at a young age in me, and saying, "Hey man, like, there's a bunch of dudes that go down to deer camp, and they don't go down to deer camp to hunt. They go down to deer camp to get hammered and just escape." And whenever I went to go hunting with Bill, we hunted. We weren't down there for anything else, right? We were there to go hunting. And that was really important for me. And then I would go have other experiences with other individuals, and I would be kind of like, well, that's not the way Bill does it. so I'm like, I don't really resonate with that too much. But, early on it was, 22s, shotguns, squirrels, rabbits, stuff like that. And in New York, the earliest that you could hunt big game was 14 with a bow. And so we had to wait until we were 16 to shotgun hunt. And so I started bow hunting as early as I possibly could, knowing that moment was coming, or that day was coming. And so I just got into it from the standpoint of, at the beginning, of course, when we're all young, we're young boys and then young men, the ego is involved in this whole thing, right? The ego is like, I have to be successful. I have to be successful. If I'm not successful, then what am I doing here? And of course, that takes us time as we get older and understand more that this is not about the success. This is more about the experience. And that's something that Bill constantly introduced to me. He also introduced to me and reinforced that, hey, you're not going to shoot a deer if you're sitting at camp, right? You have to put your time in to have that. It's not just going to magically appear out of thin air. It's called hunting for a reason and not killing. So you got to put your time in, and you're going to spend way more days in a tree stand not seeing anything but squirrels and blue jays than you are seeing deer, right? So, and that's the allure that keeps you coming back. So, let's see, I joined the Marine Corps when I was young because I had this thirst for adventure, and I had this thirst for, like, I want to continue on this lifestyle. And the only place that I could figure out how to do that at that time was in the military. And so I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old. And that actually, for about 8 years, I didn't do much hunting on the the critter side of the house, because I was so focused and in depth with the sniper community, because that was my goal. I wanted to go be a Marine Corps Scout sniper. And that quest to be the best at what I was doing, it's not like I didn't have the need or the desire to go hunting, but it was being fulfilled in another way. And so I did lose some experience and time out of my life in those 8 years that I was in the Marine Corps. I went on a couple of hunting trips, but where I was stationed in Southern California, there's hunting on the base. And at that point in time in my career, I just didn't have a whole lot of free time and opportunity to go do it. So a lot of my peers would later hunt on the base and have great success. I know one of my buds, Sean Hughes, he took a near record blacktail on Camp Pendleton. And he's been successful quite a few years out of the years that he's been hunting there, which is kind of a challenge to do, because you go to hunt on base, you got to show up super, super early and figure out who's training in what area. And you can have a plan already established. And then they say, nah, man, the Kilo 2 training area is occupied today. You got to go someplace else. And so that can throw off your plan. So having a real good knowledge of the base and being able to pivot and move real quick was critical to his success. So when I got out of the military, I came up here to Washington State, and that's where I've lived ever since 2005, September of 2005. So I'm coming up on 19 years. And so when I moved out to the West, I had no idea what I got myself into. I had no idea. This was a completely different hunting experience than, hunting thick stands of hardwood timber from either a ground blind or a tree stand, and I tried to apply those tactics here in Washington State, and it didn't necessarily work out. So I had to learn a lot. And so learning new areas, understanding that this was huge country compared to what I was experienced with or had knowledge of. And so I eventually found some dudes at a local archery range where I was starting to shoot indoor 3D competition, or not indoor 3D, indoor like Vegas leagues, and just trying to keep my archery skills up. Well, I heard some dudes in there talking about turkey hunting, and I grew up turkey hunting. Turkey hunting out east is a challenge. Those birds, they're the smartest, dumbest critter in the woods. So these guys are talking about turkeys, and I was like, man, you guys have turkeys here? This is cool. I didn't know that. And he's talking about how he couldn't get this turkey killed and couldn't get it killed. And so I kind of sidled up to him and I said, hey, man, I'm new in town. And I couldn't help but overhear you're having problems with turkey hunting. And I said, I just got here and I don't know anything about anything here with regard to hunting. I grew up on the East Coast. And so turkeys are kind of like my thing. I know how to hunt turkeys. And he goes, I'll tell you what, if you help me get this turkey killed, I will teach you what I know about elk hunting and mountain hunting here in Washington in general, because he's a hunting freak. And that's exactly what happened. We went out in the woods, we booked a time, and it was the easiest turkey hunt I've ever done. I stood on a bridge and I said, where do they roost at? And he goes, I think they're down in here. So I said, okay. I threw a box call out, and I knew I wanted something big and get a lot of noise out there. And I yelped in that box call 3 times after I heard the birds fly down, and this bird lit up and gobbled at me like he was double gobbling, triple gobbling, and he started to come right up the hill. And I had just enough time to sit down, get a decoy set, and I think we had that bird killed in like 10 minutes. He literally ran up the hill right into my setup, and Chris shot him at like 50 something yards. It was great. So he's all enamored, right? He's just like, "You're the turkey whisperer."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Dude, that's the easiest turkey I've ever called." But I was totally like cruising in that, ego state, like, yeah, I'm a badass. Well, he ended up teaching me a lot about backcountry hunting. I went on a couple of backcountry trips with him, and then I met another dude in town by the name of Luke Carrick. And Luke was a well-known dude who is an extremely proficient hunter. He's that type of dude that's like, he's like half animal.
Right.
He's that type of dude where you go in the mountains, you're going to have an opportunity, right? And he's going to put you on animals just because he has that sixth sense. And so Luke and I hunted together for years and years and years. Luke's now a sheep hunting guide up in Northwest Territories, Yukon, Alaska area. Super, super successful guy. And he taught me a tremendous amount about backcountry hunting and how it's done. And once I really got into it, I started to see like the parallels between what my previous life was in terms of planning and execution of these trips was huge. Basically, it's a mirror image of going on a backcountry hunt. It's just like planning a reconnaissance mission. All of the same things apply, with the exceptions of actions on enemy contact, because there's nobody out there, right? So I took to it like a duck to water, and that's how I love to hunt now. And I still do hunt that way. And the majority of my trips now are solo, because as we get older in life and people have responsibilities and they have other things going on, I find myself hunting solo most of the time. So, and which I'm totally fine with. I love it. And I love exploring new country. The harder, the better. The more challenge, the better. And I just enjoy every bit of it.
I love it, man. Yeah, it's funny, but people think I'm a badass because I do most of my hunting solo. And it's like, no, I just can't find people to come with me most of the time because everybody's fighting their own schedules. And when I get a chance to go, I don't want to compromise. Like, I'm just going to go. And if I can go for 10 days, I don't want somebody who can only come for 6. And so it's really tends to be more of a function of logistics than anything else that puts me out there solo. Now, I do really enjoy that time to myself and the additional mental challenge, but yeah, it was not something that I set out and said like, oh, I'm going to be the solo guy. It was much more just a matter of not being able to find the appropriate partners. So talk to me a little bit about the birth of modern day sniper. Like, what was the impetus? What did you see that led you to the conclusion that there was a need for this in the marketplace?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. That's also another kind of like almost deep dive. I'll give you the the mid level length story on this. So I started teaching civilians as early as 2001, 2002 timeframe, as I was an instructor at the 1st Marine Division Scout Sniper School, and I realized that I liked teaching this stuff. And I didn't necessarily realize that I had a knack for it back then. I was still a little too young for that, but I really enjoyed it. And I loved being able to see my students have success. I loved being able to say, no, man, this actually, like, no, we can make this happen. We can get you to hit that target. We just need to have these things, all these pieces come together so that way you can hit that target. And I started teaching because my schedule at sniper school was so like regimented. I could look out and project my time off, and I could schedule things because I'm operating off of a training schedule that's set in place, 18 months to 24 months in advance.
Right.
So taking people out to the desert in California and running some classes on the side is how I started. And when I came up here to Washington State, admittedly, when I got out of the Marine Corps, because I was injured in combat, and it was a really tough pill to swallow, both psychologically and emotionally, having my dream taken away from me. Right, that was something that I really had to sit with, and I still sit with it to this day. I mean, I've obviously made my peace with it. It's been 19 years, but there was a big thing. I mean, that was my identity, and it was gone. And so for a while, I didn't want to touch a rifle. And so when I moved to Washington, I went right back into bow hunting.
Right.
Touching a rifle was not very wasn't palatable at that time. I needed some reconciliation within myself to come back to that. And I was working as a steel fabricator at the time, and a couple of the guys in the shop, they obviously knew my background, and they were like, "Hey, so you want to go out to the range? Like, we want to go shooting?" And so I was like, yeah, I could go. I grabbed a rifle out, and so I grabbed rifles out, and we went to a local, kind of gravel pit out here where we do some shooting, and I just immediately started just picking up right where I left off and passing on knowledge. And so the individual that I did that with, his name's Matt Medeiros, and Matt was instrumental in teaching me how to weld and teaching me how to be a really good, competent fabricator. And he did it in a real quick way. Like there's dudes out there that have been fabricating for 30, 40, 50 years. And I did it for a few. So I'm not trying to say that I'm a fabricator, but he taught me the foundational principles of how it worked. And in turn, I taught him the foundational principles of how marksmanship worked. And he would go to be a phenomenal PRS shooter. Matt's super consistent. And he was able to apply those skills. And so I was like, okay, well, there's something here. And I started a small company called Central Cascade Precision in like 2007, 2008 timeframe. And I just did classes here and there for people. And I ended up getting hired on. I ended up having a guy from Surefire marketing department call me and said, "Hey, I would like to do a writer's event with your company." And I was just like, okay, I don't know what that is, but sure. What are we doing? And he's like, "Well, we're going to have like 8 dudes come out, and you're going to teach them a class, and they're all going to write articles about your class and how your class works with either an optic or a rifle or ammo or some widget or whatever it was." Now, I'm just kind of like getting started into the industry. I don't know how any of this stuff works. I'm just like, yep, I'm going to show up and I'm going to teach people. Well, what I didn't realize was those people that showed up, I got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of free advertising from that. I mean, just as a result of my time expenditure. And so that enabled me to have a solid enough reputation to be hired on by Magpul. If anybody knows who Magpul is. Magpul hired me on in 2010 as their lead precision rifle instructor. And I would later, I spent 7 years at Magpul working on various things, mainly in the training division and product development. And so Magpul's culture started to change and morph into something that just didn't resonate with me and where I wanted to continue to go as a human being, as well as, in the instructional space and my career. So I just decided, hey, it's time for me to step away from this and do this on my own. And I started a small consultation company for a couple, 3 years, did some consultation work for companies like Proof Research, Gunworks. I was their director of training for about 3 years for Gunworks, and other companies doing different things and doing training classes on the side. And so we came up with a guy that I was working with, Philip Leo. He's another former Marine Corps Scout sniper, and I brought him on to be an instructor at Gunworks. And we started to have conversations on Gunworks podcast about things that matter to us with regard to instruction. And it was just a little bit different flair than what the normal Gunworks podcast episodes were. And so we had a section called the Instructor's Corner over at Gunworks. And we just decided that we were just going to talk about the things that we were seeing in our training courses. Philip was running courses like 5 days a week with Gunworks. I was running courses not nearly at that speed, but we were always in touch and constant communication about, hey, how are we going to tweak this? What are we going to do with that? This is what we're experiencing with students, some trends. How can we add layers to control these variables and give a student a better experience? And so then we just decided that we also wanted to talk about sniper stuff and how marksmanship skills directly related to the sniper side of the house. And we didn't really want to burn up Gunworks airtime with our podcast or what we wanted to talk about, because the customer demographic is not the same. And so we just decided, hey, we're going to start up Well, podcasts. Hey, what do you want to call it? Modern day sniper. That sounds really badass. We're modern day snipers, and we want to stay at the modern day forefront of these skills. And that's what's important to us. And so we started the Modern Day Sniper podcast, and it exploded. And we had no clue. We had no clue that it would get to what it did.
Right.
And that was a concerted effort between the two of them. And we had a shitload of fun doing it. It was a ton of fun, and it still is fun. And we are, Philip went and did his own thing in a different direction this past spring. We're continuing to do everything over here at Modern Day Sniper as business as usual. And so here we are, and we're just continuing to talk about the things that are relevant and important for modern day rifling.
This is the amount of overlap and similarities between our backgrounds. I grew up in Ontario, Canada, so I know the exact
No way.
area.
What
Yeah.
part?
I was born in a place called Owen Sound. But I've lived all over the place. I did my first degree in Thunder Bay. I've lived in Barrie, Oshawa, Ajax, Pickering, London. I moved 32 times by the time I was 18. So
Whoa.
all over the place. And I got out west in 2005. And
No way.
yeah, this is crazy. And except for 2 years I lived in Australia, I've been here the whole time. And I kind of grew up moose hunting in Ontario, and then I hit out west and I was like, whoa, what's this? And I came out here as a tree planter, so I was immediately just immersed in living on barges and taking helicopter rides to the top of mountains and planting trees all day in these crazy locations. And I was just enamored with the West. Like from the first day here, I was like, this is it. I'm home. I don't know where I've been the rest of my life, but this is where I was supposed to have been. And then when I started, I was a business consultant. Well, I was actually still in forestry engineering at the time when I launched Mindful Hunter. And I was searching around for names for it because I wanted this. It was like the concept of a Renaissance man. Like I've always read a lot, and I loved like the guy who could build a house and then feed his family with animal that he killed, but still write poetry at night. Like I loved this like diverse idea of masculinity. And my first original idea, and I still have the original logos, was Modern Hunter. And
nice.
I ran with it for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I was sitting around the dinner table with my mother-in-law. She's this old Argentinian lady. And she's like, it's not right. It's not right. And I'm like, I know, but I don't know what the word is. And she was the one who said, it's Mindful Hunter. And it was like this light bulb just went off. And I'm like, yeah. That's this like cognitive approach, like being thoughtful about things. That's what I was trying to get at. So that's, man, yeah, the overlap is almost a little bit spooky. Now, I'm trying to think of where the next best place to go. I think I should tell the story of what actually led me to calling you, because I think it's going to highlight some of the issues that are present in the hunting industry that some people are conscious of and some people are not conscious of, that's leading to some people's frustration here. So I'm just going to dive in. So I just came home from a 12-day mountain goat hunt. The first 4 days I was in one location. I had a hunting partner with me. We had an extremely challenging day, probably the most difficult hike of my life. 14 hours. We made it less than a mile and a half. It was one of those, like, you're constantly fighting a psychological panic because it's like, I don't know if I'm going to get out of here, man. Like, it was slide alder and devil's club to the degree you would fight and fight and fight for 45 minutes, and then you would just be so physically exhausted from trying to push your way through that stuff. You'd stop and you'd look at your Onyx, and your blue dot would drift backwards because you'd gone that short of a distance and the satellite correction and all the rest. And you're just like,
demoralizing.
And you just had to keep shutting your mind off and being like, listen, if it takes 3 days, we're getting out of here. And when we got out, he decided, that's good enough for me. I'm going home. I still had, 8 days left. So it took a couple days to kind of re-energize myself, get hopped up on ibuprofen and buy a knee brace and do what I needed to do to get back in there, and found a new spot and went back in. And essentially in the first day, I located a really nice billy. And I don't want to get too complicated, but at first glance, the billy was irretrievable. And so I didn't even really contemplate the shot itself, I looked at where the billy was, and I'm like, if he falls off of that, I don't think I can get him. Now, the longer I sat in that location, and it was a pretty complicated thing, like at the top of a basin, looking down into this canyon, he's on the right-hand side. The longer I look at it, the more I'm looking at the surrounding terrain, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I can get to his bed. So if I am able to anchor him in his bed, I can retrieve him. And then I look at where he's going to fall, and I'm like, I can't go down where he would fall, but I can go off of this ridge. I can kind of come around the bottom, and I can come up from the bottom. So I start feeling that, okay, this may be an ethical shot to take. Then I start examining the shot. And the details of the shot are it's 567 yards line of sight with a minus 28 degree angle, which worked out to about 500 horizontal yards. For people listening, I'm shooting a 300 PRC Fierce CT Rival with a Leupold VX 5 HD and shooting out of the box Hornady Precision Hunter ELDX 212 grain coming out at 2,876 feet per second. So I had my bullets chronoed. I had custom turrets put on my scope. I had a rangefinder that had analogous load data. I was using the Leupold TBR 1400, which essentially gives you 8 load categories. And then based on your drop data, you put you load it up with one of those categories, and it will give you a ballpark estimate of what the bullet drop will be. And foreshadowing, I think this is one of the issues with our industry right now, is this desire to oversimplify everything. Like, you don't need to worry about the details. We've got a product that's going to fix that for you. And I think that is kind of what's at the heart, or I figured out what was at the heart of my issue, because I thought by buying the rifle and the scope and the rangefinder, the products were what was going to solve my situation. So anyways, I start looking at this shot, and long story short, it takes me 3 days to figure out the shot. I watched that Billy's bed for 6 days. He showed up 3 times in the first 4 days for a couple hours each time. So I had time to look at him. One of the major issues I ran into was actually, and I don't even know what the technical term for this would be, but like shooting position, like how to actually arrange my body so that I could have a full sight picture within my scope, I would be comfortable, and my gun would be steady. And it took me quite a long time to figure that out. And in hindsight, of course it did. What like, I have never gone on a regular basis to really technical terrain and trying to figure it out. Okay, if there's a target over there at X distance, what am I going to do with my body and my weapon over here at this distance? Now, I've done it with archery. I sit down and practice in my basement to replicate being in a blind. I kneel down to replicate having to get under branches. I shoot at, intense angles so that I get the proper hip hint. Like, all of these things in archery I do because I know my body placement during shot sequences is going to be one of the most important factors that will impact the likelihood of success. And so I was trying it on a bipod, I was trying seated, I was trying all these things. And what I finally learned was that at that steep of an angle, if I actually put kind of right where the Picatinny rail is, or right where you attach your bipod, and it was like a pretty sharp cliff, if I actually ditch the bipod altogether, like leave it on the gun, but collapse it, and actually put the kind of apex of that gun right on the edge of the cliff, and there was some moss and stuff. It was like it had something to bite into. Then I was actually able to lay down prone behind the rifle and actually get that secure, because before then, the way the crosshairs were bouncing around at 500 yards, I was like, I'm not pulling this trigger. Like that at a 250, 300 yard shot, that kind of barrel movement would have been completely acceptable. But with the level of wind I was dealing with, the distance and the angle, I was just like, this is not ethical to pull this trigger. And the other part that goes into that is that I spent a day and a half. So I'm kind of in the middle of this basin looking straight down on this Billy. But if I go down the right hand finger ridge, I actually at one point got to 330 yards. And I spent a day and a half trying to figure that shot out, only to come to the conclusion that because I lost so much angle, he was blocked by trees. And no matter how many times he stood up and sat down or turned around, I was just never going to get a clean shot. Could have shot through some branches. Maybe other people would have been comfortable taking that shot. I know what I know about alpine timber, and those little spruce that are hanging on, with a death grip could be 80, 100 years old. And those thumb thick, you hit one of those with your bullet, it's like, this is not going to be a good day for anyone involved. So, but it was there where I picked up, I was kind of just forced into this prone position. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Then this light goes on. Okay, now I've got the shooting position figured out. If I back up to 500, now I feel like with this level of stability, I can take the shot. And got back up there, kind of ended day 4, sat there day 5 and 6, and Billy never showed up. So never got the chance to test my thing. Now, the other thing that I did do was I took a shot at the end of day 5. Billy had been nowhere to be seen. And I was kind of at the point now, okay, where I'm going to take this shot. I should test this out to make sure that, I'm going to hit where I want to. And I hit 8 inches low. And I feel like it felt like a very good shot. I know from archery what a good shot feels like. Like, I didn't flinch. It was a very clean shot. So, I've zeroed my rifle. I've shot flat out to 400 with this rifle and scope, but I've never shot at this angle, and I've never shot, at that distance with this combination. So that was also like another variable in the equation. It was like, well, it's a good thing I didn't take that shot because I would have been low anyways. Now, the takeaway for me was, if I had have had an expert level, even like an intermediate bordering on like that 201, maybe not 301, but like 201 level of knowledge and skill with my weapon, it still might have taken me a little bit to figure out the specific terrain I was in and if he was recoverable. But I feel like I would have seen this shooting position right away. Like, I would have known, okay, in this situation, this is how I need to get my body so that I can get the ideal stability I need for my weapon. I would have known in depth how the different environmental variables were going to affect my bullet trajectory. And I would have been I wouldn't have just been relying on a push button solution for my solver. I would have actually had an understanding of what was going on, like at this angle, at this distance, at this elevation, with this temperature. These are the kind of things that are going to affect my bullet and could introduce some more complexity. And I'd always been under the assumption, like, 500 yards is a number in my head that I feel like everybody throws around. Like, oh, you don't really need to sink that much time into your marksmanship if you just want to stay under 500 yards. And I realized, yeah, maybe that's true under some circumstances. Maybe if it's really flat and it's quiet and you're laying prone and there's not a lot of wind, maybe without understanding too much, you could be reliably lethal out to 500 yards. But when you get into complex mountain conditions, I think that's way overestimating what your lethal range can be without really dedicated training, like the same level of intensity that I take my archery training. Like, I've got an archery range built in my basement over here. It's only 7 yards, but it's because I need to shoot every single day. Because if I want to be the kind of killer that I want to be with my bow, that's what I know I need to do so that come elk season, it's not a bad shot that's going to send me home empty handed. And that was, and so I think I rethought my whole, like, this was one of those like epiphanies. Like, I rethought my whole perspective, and we'll call it long range hunting. But like I mentioned in our first call, I think to be accurate, it's probably more like medium range. I'm not looking to drop 1,200 yard bombs, but I think it would be a long range for hunting. It made me rethink my whole approach to long range hunting. I'd never found it that exciting before. I had this misconception that these guys were just spending a bunch of money on a gun and then just seeing an animal way far off and not really experiencing that challenge that I'm always searching for, and then just pushing a button and there's a dead animal over there. After this experience with this goat, I got super excited. I'm like, wait a minute, I have way undersold this. Like, this is far more complicated. It's far more challenging. Like, there's so much to get excited about learning here. I need to go right back to ground zero because, and as I'm sure we'll get into as this conversation progresses, I think I was in the wrong rifle. There's other products that I think weren't wrong. One of the things that I found very interesting is that I opened up a Q&A for this conversation, and I can just tell by 95% of those questions, the complexity of those questions and the specificity of like this product or that product or this. And it's like that same product over principles approach is pervasive amongst hunters. Like, everybody's like, tell me what to go buy that's going to solve my problem. Not tell me how to think or tell me how to behave or tell me how to practice. It's tell me what to buy so that will solve my problem so that I can go out and kill shit. So yeah, I can think of a couple questions to kind of bridge us into the next, area of our conversation, but I'd love, you kind of heard the high level version of that story on our first phone call, but I'd love some feedback from you. Or is this stuff that you see as common in the industry, and what's your general feedback based on that situation and some of the conclusions I came to?
Well, first off, you made a good decision. It's really, it's probably one of the hardest things that we can do as hunters or dedicated hunters, to spend 12 days in the mountains and say, I'm calling it. Right. Last year, I let 190 plus inch mule deer buck walk broadside, bedded down at 880 yards away. I had a 7 PRC. I've made shots like that before in terms of steel, but I knew within 30 seconds, not even 30 seconds, probably 15 seconds of seeing that animal that in the conditions that I wasn't going to shoot him. Just because I know what my limits are. Right. I know what my limits are. And this was an old warrior of a buck, man. It was just like, I'm not willing to watch him die or make a really like a bad decision. And the way that he was facing, a bad wind call would have led to a gut shot. And so there's certain things that I'm willing to take chances on, and that's not one of them. And so that deer walked, and the next morning I ended up killing a really nice buck anyways, trying to find him. So it's just the way hunting works. But you made a good decision. You looked at the scenario, you thought about it critically, and you went through a problem solving process and came to a conclusion that, hey, this is outside my skill set, and I'm not even going to try. So, and then, taking that one shot and saying, well, let's see where this bullet lands, and you land 8 inches low. Now your confidence is completely destroyed, right? You're just like, well, now I don't know where that bullet's going to go. And I bought all this stuff over here to tell me. And what I found is that the more gear you buy to solve those problems, the more complexity that you have in the entire system. Complexity, we need that system to work when we are at our worst, meaning mentally, physically, physiologically. You're at the end of your trip, you're mentally exhausted. You could have been dealing with any number of things that Mother Nature likes to throw at us in those conditions. So you're physically exhausted. You just said like that you went how far in 16 hours, right? Like, or how many hours? It's like those things happen. And so how it happened or why it happened doesn't matter. It's just that it happened. And now I've got all of this energy expenditure that I need to recuperate from or recover from. So you got that going on for us. And then the system itself, the mechanical workings of the system, it's been on the side of your ruck for 10 days. You know what I mean? Like, and there's not very many people that like that first shot is what matters. That first shot is what matters. If you're a proficient enough shooter that you can grab your rifle off the shelf, take it to the range after not touching it for 8 days, and see a 10-inch piece of steel at 500 yards, and you can crush that thing over and over and over again and do it like 5 or 6, 7 days in a row, after having those breaks, now you're learning your system. You understand what your system does. You understand what you need to do to make that system work to get it to hit that target. So if you can't do that, then you don't have any business pressing the trigger. We shouldn't be pushing the boundaries in the field. We should be pushing the boundaries on the range. And we should be adhering to our limits while we're in the field. Right. And so if you see a scenario like you ran into, you're like, hey, this is outside my skill set. Well, that just means that we need to up the ante on the range. We need to go shoot more. We need to go train more. So now the other thing that you brought up that's really important for people to understand is you can shoot your rifle at the range all day long. Like, I don't care. You can be in the prone or you can be on a bench and you can get your rifle doped in and everything's jamming. But if you've never built a shooting position at a 35-degree down angle, like, it's going to be super intimidating because you don't know what to do. And shooting in the mountains, people are so focused on the mathematics of the angling. Well, I got this rangefinder that'll calculate who gives a shit about that? That's like the least of my worries. My worry is being able to build a position that gives me comfort, stability, and the ability to manage recoil well enough to see where my bullet lands.
Right.
So that in the mountains, and if you're not used to shooting from a tripod, or if you're not used to like trying to figure out or get your body to do what you need it to do, it's going to be, you're going to be up against a giant wall, and it's going to be super intimidating. And so you see that wobble zone jumping around on that target, and you're just like, there's no way I'm taking that shot. I know, I've been there, right? I've been there. And it's knowing your limits. It's not knowing what you're capable of. It's knowing where your limits lie. So you stay inside that in the field and you push those boundaries in. Now, not everybody can go find a place to go shoot those angles. You can't. It's really hard to do that. Like angle firing classes where people are just like, oh, I'm going to do a high angle class. Cool. Well, that's just, you're going to go shoot in the mountains, right? That's it. And if you're going to try to do it in an urban environment, you're shooting in a city from a skyscraper to get those angles with the distance. So that's not practical either. So what is practical? Well, find a canyon in some national forest land or provincial land, where up in Canada, and shoot rocks for a day. You'll obviously be safe, right? Make sure that where your bullets are going, that everything's going to be safe. Well, I do that all the time when it's the season, the right season. You don't want to be starting fires and such, but it's a great way to take your kit to the field and operate on your time, in the sense that, like, I'm not under the stress of an animal, limited exposure or what have you, or just the sheer adrenaline or the thrill of having an animal in front of you that changes your mental landscape, right? That's a whole different topic in and of itself. But go shoot rocks. Go see what it does. Like, if you have a reticle in your scope and you can then go, okay, well, this rock here, I like to shoot at 2 MOA targets when it comes to that sort of thing. I mean, smaller is better, obviously, but I would recommend people to look at something like 2 minutes of angle. At 500 yards, that's 10 inches. So if you're using a minute of angle scope with a reticle calibrated in that, you can easily measure that rock and say, oh, that's 2 minutes, or that's a minute. And I just hit that, right? Or with a mil reticle or mil radian scope, you can say that rock is 0.6 of an inch. So let's shoot at that. And then you practice setting up your equipment, building a good shooting position, managing your data. How are you going to get your data, right? Where are you getting that information to put on the scope to hit that target from? That's a process that you need to be working on. But it's a crawl, walk, run. You have to start off someplace, and we start off by learning our rifle, by spending that time in the prone position. Seems super mundane. You're like, oh, I don't want to shoot paper. Paper is where the professionals live. I'm going to tell you that again. Paper targets are where professionals live. Professionals do not go and stretch the boundaries. Professionals live on paper, where they can analyze what their inputs to that rifle system are doing to make the results what they are. That's what it is. So if you think that, the first shot that you take from a tripod is going to be in the field, at 500 yards on an animal, you're like so far behind the power curve. You need to be shooting on paper at 100 yards or 100 meters at really small dots and see what does my rifle do and what do I do to influence where that point of impact is and my group size at 100 yards. Nobody wants to do that because it's not sexy. Nobody wants to do that because it's not fun. I mean, everybody loves to go shoot steel, but the beauty is in the process, not the result, right? The beauty is in the process, not the result. And looking at it from the standpoint of refining your marksmanship fundamentals, because that's really it's a real small percentage of what we do, right? You still got to get there. You have to put yourself in the habitat. You have to have the observation skills to be able to find the animal. You then have to have skills of knowing how to move into those areas and not spook animals or go bumbling through habitat that's blowing animals out into the next basin. Like, there's a whole lot of skills that go into hunting, because hunting really is just you putting yourself into a position where you have an opportunity for a chase. And I learned that from Robin Hurt. He's a famous African professional hunter. And he's just like, hunting is nothing more than putting yourself into a position where you have an opportunity for a chase, because that's not even guaranteed.
Yep.
Right?
100%.
So, and then when the shooting comes down, and that's what I used to tell my snipers this, shooting is only 10% of your job. But when it's required of you to shoot, it now becomes 100% of your purpose. And so we have to be able to switch back and forth. We got to be able to throw those switches. And that's really important for people to understand. So it's a holistic approach in the grand scheme of things. I know that word's kind of overused sometimes or buzzwordy, but it is. It's a holistic approach to success, right? And you have to have everything really well-rounded to bring it all together. So you made the right choice, man. You made the right choice. And you were able to analyze that scenario and say, hey, this is outside my skill set. We need to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, it was a real wake up call. And that's that's the beautiful thing, especially about like really intense backcountry hunting, is that you're consistently put in a place where you are challenged to your limits. And I think having the humility to admit that, like, I come home all the time and I'll say I failed on my hunt, and you get all these people chirping, oh, you didn't fail, you learned. And it's like, I don't know why the world has such a problem with the term failure, because to me, all that means is I was now given information about what I need to go fix. And if I don't admit that failure, how am I ever supposed to, not repeat that mistake or not be it? Like, but to me, that's step one, is that, like, yeah. And the whole thing about people saying they have no limits, it's like, no, we all have limits. The trick is, how often can you find what those limits are and then take productive action based on the feedback you got by hitting those limits? For some people, it could be the cardio on the hunt. Lots of people think a mountain hunt, oh, I put my ruck on and I did these 3, backpack cardio hikes every week, I'll be fine. And then you actually get in the mountains with 75 pounds on your back. The adrenaline's kicking and all the rest of it. And it absolutely destroys you. I mean, there's all kinds of different areas where we're going to hit those limits. So where I would like to start the discussion, and obviously we're only going to be starting it today, I think I'm a great analogy for this group of hunters that have had, before I got the rifle I'm in now, it was like, a Tikka with, I think it was like a 3-9 or it might have even been a 3-12 scope that didn't have dialable turrets. It was only holdover. And I was basically in a situation, I would zero it at 200. And as long as it was 300 and in, I could kind of just hold on the animal and the animal was going to die. And I think if you want to set that as your limit, and it's like, that's the only opportunities that I want to be able to take, I think there is a pretty simple road to that, like 250 yard-ish kind of area. Where I think the problem comes is that there's a bunch of products and guns and content for those guys, and then there's a bunch of products and guns and content for the super nerds, like guys like you and Colton and the people like, and my analogy is archery. I used to remember I couldn't listen to a John Dudley podcast for 10 minutes and I had to shut it off. I'm like, I didn't know the vocabulary. I didn't understand what this guy was talking about. And I was talking to a buddy yesterday and then he goes, well, dude, now when I listen to you on archery, that's how I feel. And I realize I've gotten to that place with archery where I understand spine and grains per inch. And I got a new Matthews lift on the vise in the shop behind me. I'm going to go tie a D loop after this. And I just built the thing from scratch yesterday. Where we're missing, content that's explained in an understandable way is that middle ground. So where do we start? Where do I start? I understand now. I'm almost positive I have the wrong weapon. I almost think the best way to start is like ground zero. How do we build? And when I made the post yesterday, I was going back and forth, like, what is it that we're doing here? And I'm like, we're overhauling my shooting system because the system is going to be the weapon I'm using, the, way I choose to solve the problem, what tools I use to get the data I need to even enter into that solver, whatever that is I'm going to be using, my skills as an individual to shoot that weapon and to solve those problems, and then the ability to cognitively address situations and figure out like, I could be over there at 400, but actually I'm going to have a better shooting position here at 500. And to me, that whole thing is my shooting system. And that's what I think we almost need to build from the ground up. So where do we start? What's the first question that I need to ask myself?
Okay, great. So the first question you got to ask yourself is, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to do? Because a lot of times people ask, they're just like, well, what should I get? And it's just like, okay, I hate answering a question with a question. But it's like, okay, well, what's your goals and then what's your budget? Those are the two big ticket items because there is a solution. There is a solution in the year 2024. I would say that there is a solution for an accurate rifle for any budget, right? You can do it as well as an optic. You just have to be really careful. You have to be pretty choosy and you got to have some discernment, which comes from having knowledge.
Right.
So what we do is a long time ago, well, maybe not even a long time ago, but there's a significant barrier for entry with regard to training. So you used to be like, you're only going to get training if you show up to an in-person class. Well, showing up to an in-person class, if that trainer is not in your backyard, you're going to travel for it. And now we're not talking, $1,000 for the cost of an entry, tuition and a couple $100 in ammunition. Now we're talking about like, this is a major expense. Like I have to travel for this. I have to have, lodging and food, and I'm going to be away from my family and work. And so that is a huge barrier for a lot of people to get good training. And so what we wanted to do was break that barrier down and at least reduce it to the point where most people with even a small amount of expendable income could get some reliable training. And we started doing online training. And so that comes from, we started off with our long form master classes. However, we then looked at it and we were just like, man, we could do a little bit more. And we started a monthly subscription service over at moderndayRifleman.com. And inside there is our own community of about 8,000 or 9,000 people, and it's growing every single day. And it's just people there that don't want to have to deal with all of the chirpy dudes, right, over on other forums that pretty much nobody can ask a question because you're going to get crushed by people that think you should know better. And it's just like, don't even get me started on that egotistical shit, because it's like, all you got to do is put a mirror up in front of those people and it just pisses them off. So we created this place where people could go to ask the most mundane questions and get really good, solid answers to get them started off on the right track and not have to sift through YouTube and all that other stuff. And there's a package inside the Modern Day Rifleman Network called New Shooter Essentials. And new shooter essentials is exactly that. It's if you're a new shooter, this is the essential knowledge that you need to understand. You need to understand how to assemble your rifle. Do not go to Sportsman's Warehouse or Bass Pro Shops or wherever it is that you're going and have the dude behind the counter mount your stuff. Don't do that, like right off the bat. You need to understand how to do it yourself, and you need to understand how everything is assembled, because you're most likely going to have to troubleshoot it. It's not that hard to do, and we can teach you how to do this, and so that way you're more competent. So along with understanding how your rifle is assembled and put together, we also have to learn how to set it up to us physically. Like you mentioned, how can I get a sight picture and make my body work for this particular really contorted, complex technical problem that I'm trying to solve, which is mountain shooting? If your rifle's not set up properly for it, or for the majority of the shooting positions you're going to find yourself in, you're going to struggle. You're not going to be able to see a sight picture, and you're not going to be able to even shoot, period. So the next step is understanding how to set your rifle up to fit you physically. And then that next step from there is, I need to learn my optic. What does my optic do? How does it work? How do these turrets work? How do I float my turrets, and how do I adjust them? I'm not a proponent of etched turrets. I'm just a proponent of using straight angular units of measure, where it's a mil radian or a minute of angle. I don't care. Pick one or the other and get away from using those custom turrets. They're only for a certain set of parameters. Now, if you're on the East Coast or you're in like a place like Texas where the weather is largely, there's definitely places in Texas where, you have the extremes, but you get my drift in the sense that those weather extremes play a pretty significant role. That's where those custom bullet drop compensated turrets do not work. You need to just use angular units of measure. Then you need to understand how your rifle performs in terms of dispersion, meaning the accuracy that it has, and go put that thing on paper at 100 yards, learn what it's capable of, and then learn what your ammunition is capable of with that rifle. You might have to go through a couple of different brands or manufacturers to find the ammunition that shoots best in your rifle. From there, we're going to start reinforcing fundamentals of marksmanship. We're going to start saying, okay, we've got our rifle set up, we've got it zeroed. Now let's break apart the fundamentals of marksmanship, ability or body position, right? Let's get that dialed. Now we got to go into aiming the rifle, which is natural point of aim, sight alignment, sight picture. Then moving into breathing, how breathing influences our sight picture and how it influences us both physically and physiologically. Then we move into, okay, we got that dialed. Now we have to learn how to press the trigger, because we don't squeeze triggers, we don't pull triggers, we press triggers. Once we go into that, we go into the next part of the equation, which is huge for us as hunters, is the recovery and follow through. Mm-hmm. So when the rifle goes bang, it's going to physically move as a result of recoil. That movement, if the movement of the rifle is inconsistent, meaning you're doing something physically behind it different every single time it recoils, that's called angle of jump. And the angle of jump, I don't know if you guys can see it, mm-hmm. When the rifle recoils, that muzzle is going to rise, right? And as the muzzle rises, remember, the bullet's traveling down the bore, and that bullet takes time for it to get out of the bore. The lighter your rifle and the heavier the recoil, the more movement is going to happen before the bullet gets out of the barrel, which is really important for us as hunters to know, because we all want to get lightweight guns. But we're in this kind of mindset of American mindset where it's like, we got to go bigger. We've got to get bigger. We got to get that 30 cal. You got to get that 30 cal Magnum. And you're putting it in like a 9-pound configuration.
Yeah.
To shoot that well is going to challenge even a professional shooter, even a dude that shoots all the time, because of that recoil dynamic. And so your consistency in the way that you address that rifle and build your shooting position is incredibly important. Because what's going to happen is you're going to see, you say, I got a great sight picture, press the trigger, bullet goes someplace else. Why'd that happen? Reset, put another one in the chamber, go through the same process, boom, send it again. Now this bullet goes over here. You do that 5 times, and you got a group on the target that looks like this. And then you go back to the prone and you zero, and you're like, I'm back to this. What is happening? It's how your body is influencing where the bullet's leaving the muzzle as it moves in time and space. So these are like the little nuances that nobody really talks about. And it's very important because it directly impacts your ability to shoot precisely and accurately. So, and then once we figure that out, now it's time to, hey, let's get our ballistic computer program dialed, right, on your phone. We got to match what the rifle and bullet is doing at distance to what this thing is predicting for us, because we don't believe the computer, we believe what the bullet just told us. And so we have to make those two line up. So that's knowledge in and of itself on the external ballistic side of the house. Then we have wind to deal with. We got to go out and learn what the effects of wind are on our bullet. Like, this is a process, man. And at the very end of that, that's when we start training in those positions. That's when we're like, okay, here's a little scenario. Here's a target. I got to find the target. I got to be able to range the target, get data to shoot the target, and build a position to shoot it. So that is a system that needs to be, number one, developed. And once it's developed, it needs to be nurtured through training. And I'm a big time keep it simple guy. Like, the more simple things are, the easier it's going to be for you to do those things when you're at your worst and you need that stuff to perform. So I shot a rifle match a while ago, 10 years ago now. The competition dynamic steel safari. It was my first introduction to like a find it, range it, shoot it type scenario. And it's 3 days of 10 stages each. So you're shooting 30 stages. And what an eye-opening experience. I went on that whole match, right? I didn't know what to expect, but my buddy, Cody Carroll, he had shot it a few times, and I was like, so what do I need? And he goes, you need a rifle that shoots really well. You need to have your system dialed in terms of your management of your equipment, and just shoot well. It's like, okay, that sounds pretty straightforward. You know, we're snipers. Like, this is what we do. So I went on that match, and I took a 10-pound Proof Research TAC-2 rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor with a Vortex Gen 1 Razor, Harris bipods, a set of trekking poles, and a backpack. And that's it. Well, I had a set of Leica range-finding binos. And I didn't even use the ballistics in there. I had a data card on my wrist. And I shot that match completely cold, never done it before, and I ended up 7th place out of like 80-something shooters. I just relied on my ability to shoot a rifle. I had very, very simple equipment. And so I spent more time applying the fundamentals of all of the steps of that game that resulted in me hitting more targets. It's not about the gear that you have, man. It's about knowing the gear that you have.
Right.
It's about learning how it works and maximizing it to its highest potential. So I always tell people, get good, like, buy the gear that you can buy, or buy the forgiveness that you can afford. Because the higher the quality of the equipment that you have, the more forgiving it's going to be. And that's really what we want. We want forgiveness. But once that's set, stop buying gear and immediately go into professional training. And I'm not saying just come to Modern Day Sniper. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a ton of people out there that offer training. And I tell all of my students, yeah, cool, you're training with me, but the information that I'm giving you is only through the lens that I see. You go to another teacher. I'm going to do a joint class with Jacob Bynum at Rifles Only Monday, Tuesday of next week in Colorado in Leadville. So Jacob looks at shooting through his lens, right? Through the shade of his lens. And I look at it through mine. And we're going to do a joint class together to bring those two lenses over the top of one another, right? So that way students can get different flavors. Do that with different teachers. Try different things. Try to learn from different people. And it's not about your instructor's background. It has nothing to do with the instructor's background. I know dudes that are amazing PRS shooters, that they're phenomenal at it, but they don't understand how to communicate what they do and their greatness into layman's terms that people can apply. And that doesn't make them bad people. It certainly doesn't make them bad shooters. But don't necessarily just look for someone's background. Look for their ability to communicate information to you, right? And their background's important. Like, I've been a mountain hunter since I moved here in 2005, and I got a lot of experience doing that. but I also have a shitload of experience teaching people how to shoot rifles. And I know exactly what I need to do, because you and I could sit together, Jay, and in 2 days' time, with just you and me one-on-one, you're going to come away from that range like a ninja. You're going to be like, I know exactly what I can do. I know what I can't do, and I know what I need to focus on to improve. And in just 2 days' time, you're going to go, whoa, this is a whole new world. Because I know what I need you to do to get you to the goal that you want to get to. Right. And so, yeah, you want to look for dudes that have a process and that are in love with that process, because the results will eventually speak for themselves if you stay focused on the process.
Awesome. I love the sentiment you open with about a clarity of goals, because being the gear guy, I get this all the time. What tent should I buy? Mm-hmm. I'm like, what season? What location? What elevate? What do you mean, what tent should you buy? And my favorite response is, if you buy something that is reasonably good at everything, it's going to be excellent at nothing. So if you're okay with that, you know what I mean? Fine. But if you want something that is excellent at one purpose, you need to compromise its performance across other ranges. And I think that
100%.
I mean, I can see that's why I'm in a 300 PRC. I wanted a gun that could kill everything on the planet. But I realized, if I'm actually like, what are my goals? I want to be able to kill mountain animals, primarily sheep and goats, at 600 yards and in complex mountain hunting situations. Mm-hmm. And I don't want a moose gun. I don't want an elk gun. You know what I mean? There might be other stuff that tool would also be useful for. But if I'm super specific with myself, and I think that's the what I want to get across here as we wrap up this kind of first episode. I think if you really want to get a tool that is going to be excellent at a job, you need to force yourself to be ruthless about getting some level of specificity about what you want that tool to do. And I think that was probably the first mistake I made. I was looking for a do-it-your-all paintbrush, the one gun to rule them all that I could go shoot a moose with and then also go up into the mountains with. And what I ended up getting was a gun that didn't really do any of that, particularly well. So if we're going to be hyper-specific about my goals, my goal is a mountain hunting system that's capable of up to 600 yards, and I'm capable of executing that system in complex mountain hunting conditions. Now, I think the first question I need to be asking myself is what kind of bullet and caliber I should be basing that system on. I think that's a deceptively complicated question to ask yourself. And I know I could just say to you, Caylen, what bullet should I shoot? And you're going to have 30 years of experience, and you're going to say, for you, this is the bullet you're going to go shoot. But not everybody has direct access to you, and I don't want to teach people how to ask people a question. I want to teach people how to answer a question. So I'm almost thinking that maybe an ideal way to wrap this up would be assigning some homework. Like, I love this idea of the new shooter essentials, and that was the whole reason I launched Mindful Reviews. And it's the same thing. We're not nearly as big as you guys, but it's a subscription-based membership platform. I love the idea of a paywall because it keeps out the trolls. And it's like, if you can't afford a couple cups of coffee a month for this thing that you tell everybody is what you're most passionate about in life, I question how committed you really are to your goals. You know what I mean? And to get quality information from people who give a shit, I love places like that because I think it's well worth it. So I love the idea of this new shooter essentials, but I'm almost like to wrap up with a homework assignment so that the people who are listening, because they're not going to have the same goals as maybe that is an elk gun or a moose gun or, a something else gun that maybe it's a whitetail gun. I don't know. What is the homework you would assign to somebody, or what should they go read or sign up for? And recommending services is totally fine on this. What's the homework so that we can go in and articulate a clear, specific goal, and then and you can tell me I'm wrong. Maybe the bullet is not the right first question to ask, but that would be kind of my push back to you is what's the homework for this first step so we can answer this first question to get this, roadmap going.
That's fantastic, man. I think that's a great way to do this. Last two hunting classes that I've taught, I've seen students that are in systems that, marketing got them. They're like,
Yep.
marketing got them, right? Cool, fine. This is what I have. I had this individual with a super lightweight 300 PRC, and unfortunately, he ended up kissing himself in the forehead twice.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like, for me, that's just like, it makes my heart sink, because number one, I was unsuccessful as an instructor as a result of that, right? I can only teach so much. But this particular individual got to the point where he was so recoil sensitive that your brain does not rise. You don't rise to the occasion. Okay. You're going to fall to your level of unconscious competence with your nervous system. Mm-hmm. Period. End of story. Like, I don't care what anybody says. So I put this guy behind a 6.5 Creedmoor, one of my hunting rifles. It's in 6.5 Creedmoor. It weighs 10 pounds, right? That dude hit every single target I gave him. Every single target I gave him. But then with that 300 PRC, not only were we missing, but those misses were not inches, they were freaking feet. Mm-hmm. Because he's terrified of shooting the damn thing, right? So number one, next, the homework assignment that I think is really important for guys to do. Cruise over to the Modern Day Sniper YouTube channel and look up our cartridge comparison video. I sit and I talk about some common long range shooting cartridges that are also commonly used in long range hunting, because that's pretty much what happens. Is like, we have long range shooting cartridges that are then, purposed for hunting. Learn where the numbers really point. Learn where the numbers really point. If you have a ballistic computer program, right, like this Hornady Fordhoff solver, you have the ability to model everything with the exception of recoil. You can model drop, you can model wind, you can model energy, remaining velocity, time of flight. You can look at it all. You can look at it all, and then you can create your own graph and say, actually, 400 yards and in, 28 nozzlers, dumb. I don't need 28 nozzler, because I'm burning all of that powder. I'm burning almost 80 grains of powder to get 2 inches less drop. Who cares about 2 inches at 400 yards? Who cares? Right? And you can't shoot that rifle well. Or like the 300 PRC. Well, the 300 PRC bests everything at wind. Well, how much does it best it by? 1.5 inches. At what range? 500 yards, compared to a 6.5 PRC that's shooting a significantly lighter bullet with just as much energy downrange. And if you can't shoot that 300 PRC well, it doesn't matter. Only the hits count, bud. Right? So figure out what rifle you can shoot, and then do some cartridge and bullet comparisons and go, what do these numbers really, really mean? And once you start layering them all up and you make your own graph or you make your own spreadsheet, then you're going to start going, oh man, I need to rethink this. Because for what you want, Dave, immediately, not 6.5 Creedmoor, because I want a little bit more horsepower for the wind, right? And we definitely don't need to be getting into 26 nozzler territory, because that's just velocity. Like, that doesn't mean anything, right? Velocity is a depreciating asset. Or you want to get into like the 7 millimeters, which are going to give you a little bit more recoil and a little bit better wind performance. But when you start comparing even 7 millimeters to bullets shot from a 6.5 PRC, it's really hard to make that decision. Do I want to go 7 or do I want to stick with a 6.5? I've killed all kinds of stuff with a 6.5 millimeter bullet, all kinds of it. I would not have a problem shooting an elk at 600 yards with a 6.5 PRC. Would not even think twice. And the reason why, I know that I can shoot it well. I'm going to be able to put a bullet exactly where I want. It's got really excellent performance in the wind, and it has enough energy to do what I need it to do on the animal terminally. So I would say that's the homework assignment. Go research your cartridges. Don't come to me with marketing from said company who's trying to sell you bullets or cartridges or guns. Don't come to me with that, because I'm going to then come to you and say, have you done your homework, right? Have you done your homework? Do you really know what your cartridge is doing in comparison with everybody else's? That's where the rubber really meets the road. And you're going to go, oh, okay. Now, there are instances where people are going to have very widely differing opinions on this. I don't care. I know what my experience was. I took a 6.5 Creedmoor to Africa, and 3 out of 3 guys, we shot over 40 big game animals in 7 days with 143 grain ELDX, and only 2 out of those 43 animals that we killed needed more than 1 shot. And we were shooting them all the way out to close to 600. I was shooting mountain zebras, killing them with 1 shot with a 6.5 Creedmoor, shooting 143 grain ELDXs at like mid 500s.
Yeah, it's pretty compelling. Do you know this guy named Form?
Form, I do not.
Yeah, me neither. So I'm good friends with the EXO guys. They do the Hunt Backcountry podcast.
Mm-hmm.
They recently did 2 episodes. I believe they're 478 and 479. And they kind of broke the internet because they had this guy on, Form, and he basically made this really bold statement that the kind of hunting industry has everything ass backwards, and that from a lethality perspective, you are better off with a smaller caliber fragmenting bullet for a variety of reasons. And he goes all the way to like 6 mm. And in fact, Steve, the head honcho at EXO, is on his way to Alaska as we speak with a 6 mm to go shoot some pretty big stuff. And that was the second half of what kicked off our kind of partnership here, is that I realized I don't have the ability to analyze these opinions or test them. And once we get to the point where my shooting is at the ability, I would love to take out some different stuff into some different materials and see how it operates at different ranges and what the actual, lethality of these different calibers are. But I do think there's been this, bigger kills, and it's like, I can see the common sense. You would think a bigger object slamming into something at a similar velocity would create, a higher likelihood of death. But common sense is not always based on science either. Like intuition is just that. It's an intuition. It's not always right. So I'm not surprised at all, having been exposed to that kind of, like, if you'd have said that to me 3 months ago, I would have, and I would have questioned you or thought that sounds pretty odd. But kind of in light of all this new stuff that's kind of been surfacing lately, I do think there is a push recently in the industry to a more science kind of evidence-based approach to a lot of this stuff. Dude, I'm excited, man. Like, we could go on all day. And the one note I want to make, because I literally received hundreds of questions when I posted that we were doing this podcast, and I want to put everybody at ease. Listen, we're going to get to them. I'm categorizing them because I had like, what bipod should I buy? And how do I set up to a tripod? And it's like, okay, well, those need to go under like a supported shooting conversation, because that stuff is so integral. It's not that the Gunworks Elevate is better than the Spartan Javelin Pro. It's that you don't have the principles required to actually ask yourself the right questions to know what product is ideal for your solution. And it's probably not a product itself. It's a principle that you're trying to solve. And then you can actually choose within a family of products to solve that problem in the way you are. So I want to put everybody at ease. I've saved all those questions. I'm going to break them down into different categories. And through our training and these conversations and through resources that you've already pre-built, like this video that we've assigned people, we will get to all those questions. But it's going to be rare that I'm going to say, like, what caliber is best for this animal at this distance? And it's like, no. We're going to address the principle behind your questions and then skill you up with the ability to go answer that question for yourself, so that when you come up with a different question or the variables change, you're not just left asking somebody how to solve your problem again. You've actually got the inherent skill and knowledge to go solve that problem yourself. Yep.
Fair enough, man. Absolutely. 100%. The last homework, I like 2 pieces. The cartridge comparison is a good one. You guys go to the range and figure out what you can really hold in terms of your accuracy and precision at 100 yards, right? What can you really hold with your rifle? And then that's gonna say, okay, well, if you can do a minute of angle or inside a minute of angle from the prone position, get yourself off of prone. If you have a tripod and you've done something like that, try it. Go see what you can do with your group size at 100 yards and say, oh, well, I got this tripod, I got this piece of gear, I'm just going to use that in the field. I would probably put that on paper at 100 yards and see what you can actually do from it. So I would do that. And then that cartridge comparison is really important. So that way you guys can just have a true understanding of hey, what is really going on out there with regard to my performance, the different cartridges and different bullet performances. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked for this too, Jay. This is going to be a really good series, and it's obvious it's hunting season here too. August 1st, our bear season opened here in Washington. I'm going to be going on a bear trip here at the end of August, scouting for some deer because my high country mule deer hunt is coming up September 15th. That I'm usually super hyper focused on because it's the best chance that we have for good deer in Washington State at the current situation with regard to game numbers and how game is being managed and and those things. So it's season, it's time, and I've been shooting my hunting rifles quite a bit, kind of reverting from shooting my PRS guns to the hunting rifles just in preparation for the season. Right. So I need to get my wheels greased too. So yeah, I think this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. And you and I chat and figure out like, hey, how do we really want to do this? Like I can bring you on our platform, or I can come back on your platform and we can figure out how we're going to do maybe a live Q&A session and get some stuff done. So that would be pretty badass.
Yeah, I'm down. One last technical question, because you mentioned going to the range and figuring out where you can comfortably hold and shooting some groups. What's your group size recommendation? Like how many bullets actually make a group? Because I've seen people go back in and forth on that. What do you recommend? Like what's practical? Because not great. 20 bullets would be great, but like with the cost of ammunition and everything else, there's this fine line between what's reasonable and what's ideal.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to people?
Yeah, so my hunting rifles, my competition rifles, I don't settle on anything without a 10-shot group. That's on the competition rifle side, right? So when I'm like doing load development or settling in for a final zero, or settling in for trajectory validation at long range, and I'm doing 10 shots or 20 shots minimum, because that's where I can expect that rifle to perform in its particular use. Now, my hunting rifles, 6 shots. I'll back that down to 6 shots. And when I'm training for like paper stuff, I'll bump that down to 3 to 5 shots. Like if I'm going to go do and say I'm going to shoot from the standing position from a tripod at a piece of paper target at 100 yards, I'll do 3 to 5 shots, and just to see where that group lies. Okay. Now, with regard to the standard of accuracy, man, that's completely subjective to your skills. So if you've never seen what 3 minutes of angle looks like at 100 yards, just put a 3-inch circle up there at 100 yards and know that 3 inches or 3 minutes of angle at 500 yards is 15 inches. So 15 inches is kind of like the size of an elk's vital zone, right? Mule deer is going to be a little bit smaller, but it's going to be pretty close. So 3 MOA is on the big side, right? And then we also have dispersion inside that 3 MOA. So you might want to just hold yourself to a standard of 2 minutes of angle just to make sure that you're staying inside the comfy zone of those vital zones, right? And then identify what type of critter it is that you want to shoot. Like, are you trying to shoot, small deer or coyotes or foxes? That's a different story. It's a smaller target. So then if you're like, well, I've got a late season, rifle elk tag this year, man, you're going to be shooting big targets. The last piece of advice that I'll give you guys is to know and understand that the range to the target is just a number. The aiming point does not change. The size of the aiming point does not change. The precision of the aiming point does not change whether you're shooting a dot at 100 yards or whether you're shooting an elk at 500 yards. You still need to be aiming small. You still need to be picking a spot, and you still need to be precise. So don't let the range to the target get you all like Twitter pated. It's a number, and your data or your computer program is going to tell you what you need to dial to hold for that number. So really stay focused on your marksmanship and don't get so blown out of or wrapped around the axle with range.
Love it. All right, man. I know we both got a bunch of stuff coming up, so
Yep.
I want everybody to also be aware this is a series and it's going to progress, but this is not happening overnight. So it'll going to be a few weeks, a month in between like each of these sessions as I go away and do my homework, and we kind of schedule some in-person stuff and some more online stuff. So stay tuned, and this will progress, but it's going to be a work in progress.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks a bunch, Jay. Thanks you guys for listening to us, rabble on here for some time, and I'm looking forward to the next one, man.
Same. I will put all the links for everything we discussed in the show notes and look forward to chatting soon. All right. Catch you later, Caylen.